totally awesome, radical, bodacious, gnarly 80s reviews. And before we go too far, the first thing I want to kind of say is I'm sorry that the first episode went so long. I promise that is not going to be a common or recurring theme here. It's just we had a lot of groundwork to lay in that first episode. So now that that's done, we can kind of jump right in. Yeah, I promise that episodes that last almost a half an hour longer than the movie we're reviewing, that's not going to be a thing. So anyway, so the last time we got acquainted with the concept of the series and started out by looking at 80s icon Police Academy. And as promised, we're not just going to look at one Police Academy movie, we are going to look at all of the Police Academy movies. So less than a year later, so it should show you kind of what we were talking about earlier, that these films that were heavily sequelized back in the 80s, they had a fairly quick turnaround. You see that today with things like the Saw movies. There for a while, I think they were bringing one out every Halloween. They may still be, I don't know. But yeah, so this is like a year later, and they're already bringing out the next Police Academy movie. That just shows you kind of how quick the turnaround was. And again, one of the other things that we were mentioning, how cheaply these were being made. You know, these were not, you know, taking their time and making sure they got everything just perfect. It was get them done, get them out, and, you know, get them done for as little money as possible so that whatever we bring in makes more profit. So you're going to notice, as we talk about some of these, there is a pattern with heavily sequelized series back in the 80s. And some might even say now, but you definitely see it in 80s films, especially, you know, this one I mentioned before, Nightmare on Elm Street, Friday the 13th, Halloween. You know, you notice how these are all either comedies or horror movies. Again, things that can be done fairly quickly and cheaply. So what normally happens is you have the first film in a series, which generally is given a little bit more time and a little bit more attention and grabs an audience's focus because it offers something different, or it has a unique gimmick, or a young filmmaker is leaving their mark. You know, there's some reason why that first film stands out as an icon. Why out of the hundreds and hundreds of movies released, these ones still kind of stay in the collective memory. So what happens then is a studio says, well, we got to capitalize on this right away and let's make a sequel. Now, the thing to keep in mind about the 80s is that while sequels were very popular, they were by no means a guaranteed thing. These days, studios think in terms of franchises. They think in terms of, you know, 5, 10, 15 different movies. You know, so they're already planning this and signing actors to multi-picture deals before the first one is even released, regardless of whether or not it's good. So some of these things that they decide we're going to do a sequel to were never really meant to have a sequel or to have a follow-up, especially if they were something with a fairly unique take, or in the case of a comedy that was kind of existing on one joke, which Police Academy, I think most people will agree, pretty much is. You know, group of misfits who defy authority in a position that demands obedience, and the word just went right out of my head. And conformity, there it is. You know, there it is. That's the premise, that's the joke. So there's not a lot of ground you can cover and not a lot of new things you can do with that premise. So what you find is that one of two things generally happen with the second one. Usually the second one is where the filmmakers are still trying to do something unique. They're trying to build on what was done before, and they either do this by copying wholesale the plot and what worked in the original and just tweaking it a little bit here and there, or they say, okay, we are going to change a pivotal moment or a pivotal element of this to take them out of their comfort zone and place them somewhere else and hope that the jokes kind of expand from there. And that's what happens with Police Academy 2. We are taking the graduates of the first film and now actually putting them to work. The first movie was about them becoming cops, and now this is them actually being cops. And this is where we pick up with Police Academy 2, their first assignment.
I love the 80s. I love the 80s.
So, what is the plot of Police Academy 2? So, the connecting tissue of this one is that a specific neighborhood in the city, wherever we're at, has really gone to hell. A gang is terrorizing the local merchants and the residents. The police are completely undermanned and understaffed, and the chief, our returning chief from the last film, who only seems to drop in on these things to set up the plot and then leaves, goes to the local police precinct, which is run by Peter Lassard, the brother of Commandant Eric Lassard from the first film, who is the chief of the precinct, and tells him that he has 1 month to turn this precinct around and to get all these crimes under control, or he's out. This comes as great news to Pete Lassard's second in command, Lieutenant Mauser, who is our new Harris, our new antagonist character, who wants Lassard out so he can become captain of the precinct. So, desperate to turn things around, Pete Lassard calls his elder brother Eric Lassard and asks him, do you have any fresh recruits that you can send down here to help us out? And Eric Lassard sends him the graduates of the previous Police Academy film, Mahoney, Hightower, Tackleberry, Jones, Faulkner, Hicks, and they are tasked with helping get this crime wave under control. So that is our plot. So already noticeable, we are missing a couple key points and key characters. You notice Blanks and Copeland are gone. They're not in this one. Also, more importantly, Callahan and Harris are both gone, which makes sense in that they were instructors at the police academy, and as this film doesn't take place at the police academy, there's not a real reason they would be there. So those two are gone. Also, kind of conspicuous by his absence throughout most of the film is George Gaines as Commandant Lassard. He has a brief moment in the opening where he talks to his brother on the phone. Later in the film, about the midpoint, he goes and visits his brother at a Benihana, and then he shows up at the end. Again, I guess this makes sense because he is the commandant of the police academy, so why would he be going somewhere else? I also kind of feel like it's possible, I have no proof of this, that this would be around the time of 1985, I believe, This would be about the time Punky Brewster was kind of at its height. So I have the feeling George Gaines may have been busy filming that and could only give a certain amount of time to this Police Academy sequel. So I think that might be why he's only kind of a guest appearance in this. So those are our returning cast members. As stated, we have a variety of new characters. So first up, we have Howard Hesseman as Pete Lassard. Howard Hesseman is probably best remembered by sitcom lovers as his role as Dr. Johnny Fever, the disc jockey in WKRP in Cincinnati. Again, as mentioned, we have our new Harris character, Lieutenant Mauser, played by Art Matino, who I believe I'm mispronouncing his name. I deeply apologize for that. We'll also have a couple of other characters whom we'll talk about as they kind of come up. But those are kind of our new stand-ins. And look, let's just not beat around the bush. Let's just get right into this. The president of the the former president, I guess I should say, of the United States, Barack Obama, recently said it better than I could.
We have seen that movie before, and we all know that the sequel is usually worse.
Now, he was talking about something far, 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 far worse than a Police Academy sequel, but the point remains valid. Like I said, the 80s were the decade of heavy sequelization, and it's also the decade that kind of gave us the cliche that the sequel is never quite as good. And folks, I'm sorry to tell you, Police Academy 2 is a pretty bad movie. It is decidedly weaker than its predecessor. Now, I took a lot of time in the previous film picking apart things that didn't work, elements that didn't hold together. It had a very disjointed structure. Certain performances weren't actually that good. I gave the movie shit, but I also said that in the end there was still something very endearing and very charming, and it still makes it a watchable movie. Police Academy 2 does not have a lot of those elements. A lot of things that worked in the first one don't work here. So what doesn't work? Well, I think primarily the structure of the story doesn't work. One thing I really appreciated about the original, and I didn't get a chance to say this in the 2 hours I talked about this movie, was that I think part of the reason for the original Police Academy's success was that there was a very organic feel to it. Yes, I know I ragged on it for, again, it's kind of haphazard structure, but in a way that worked to its advantage, because you get the feeling, and again, I don't know how true this is, but you get the feeling that there was a lot of room for improvisation. There was a lot of room for the actors to kind of bring their own flavor to it. It had a very relaxed feel. It had a very comfortable, lived-in kind of atmosphere that the characters and the actors were able to create, which again is kind of interesting because it's a story about a bunch of misfits rebelling against structure and authority, but the lack of structure kind of is what made it work. This film, it feels like it's trying to be too scripted. It took the ease that the characters had and the actors had in the previous film and tried to write it as opposed to letting it find itself naturally. If you want a modern day example, think of it in these terms, or I guess this wouldn't be too modern day, but the original Pirates of the Caribbean movie is brilliant and wonderful because they gave Johnny Depp the script and he created the character using what was there and then brought his own flavor to it. Well, when Jack Sparrow became the breakout star of that film, when they went to the sequels, they tried to write the idiosyncrasies and the quirkiness into the character instead of letting Johnny Depp find those things on his own and thus making the character feel like he wasn't quite as fun as he was previously. He felt like they were trying to make him goofy as opposed to just letting him be goofy, if that makes any sense. And I do feel like that is what is really happening here. Instead of letting the actors take the script and make it their own, they're trying to write examples or trying to write excuses for them to do the thing that they were known for in the first one. And as such, a lot of the organic nature of the original film is lost and the characters feel very stilted. Let me give a great example. The guy I ragged on the most in the previous one, Mahoney, who I said, Steve Guttenberg was just not right for this role. And I stand by that. The problem is, in this one, he's even more not right. It's even more straining against type because he was allowed to bring some of his natural Steve Guttenberg charm into Mahoney, albeit in a character that didn't work with that charm, but he was still able to infuse it. Here, they're trying to write that charm into Mahoney, and it doesn't work. Mahoney is even more out of place and feels like he's straining against the writing in just about every scene he's in. It's really hard to watch. And he's not the only one. Like I said, Howard Hessman constantly looks like he is looking for the exit. He does not want to be there. You can tell. It is just so obvious that he's not having a good time. He's not finding the film fun or anything like that. There's a reason why he doesn't appear in any of the subsequent sequels, which apparently, I didn't know, apparently he was offered, but he said no way. And you can kind of get that watching this. His scenes do not have the graciousness that George Gaines brought to Lassard. There is a stress there that is on the actor and not on the character. Likewise, we have to talk about, again, our replacement Harris, Lieutenant Mauser, who just, man, how to explain why Mauser doesn't work? And I gotta say this, it is not due to a lack of effort from the actor. All right, Art Materno, who again I'm mispronouncing his name, I'm so sorry. He is trying, and you can see that he is really trying and giving it his all. It's not a question of someone being lazy or unhappy with the role that they're playing. It has to do with a fundamental flaw in the character and the understanding of what worked previously and not having it work now. Here's the thing about why Mauser doesn't work.
Free comedy tip, Slick. The pie gag's only funny when the sap's got dignity.
And that right there is why Harris worked, but Mauser doesn't. Harris had dignity. Harris, despite the character he will eventually become, in the original Police Academy, he had dignity. He was proud of himself. He was assured of himself. You get the feeling watching Harris in that first movie, and even in subsequent films, that he was a good cop. Maybe a little rigid, but that he took his job seriously and he took pride in what he did. And therefore, when bad things happened to him, he still found a way to maintain or struggled to maintain his dignity, and that's what made it funny. That's what G.W. Bailey did so freaking well, was take all of these pranks and take all of these horrible things that were done to him, but still do his best in the most insane of situations to hold himself up with the dignity that he felt he'd earned. Mauser, by contrast, has none of that dignity. He's got none of it. He really is a child, a kiss up, a suck up, someone who just wants advancement, and and I think we could actually call him a villain in this film as opposed to an antagonist, because he is actively trying to allow crime to happen in order to get what he wants. And he takes all of the pranks done to him with way less. He takes it more like Eric Cartman.
That's right, you and me, right now, we're having it out. Let's go, come on, come on.
Which, that kind of reaction can be funny once or twice, but it doesn't hold up in an entire movie or two whole movies. Like, it wears thin, as opposed to seeing someone with a lot of respect for himself constantly being humiliated and yet still attempting to carry himself with all the dignity that Harris does. So yeah, it just didn't work. I will say they tried to expand some of the characters. So this is the first of the Police Academy movies where we actually hear Jones talk in a couple of lines without having some kind of affectation to his voice. This is also the one where we decide that Jones, apart from being a sound effects machine, is also a martial artist. And I think this is just so Michael Winslow could do his dubbed Japanese karate shtick, which is funny. It is kind of funny. So yeah, we do try to get a little bit of character moving forward, but we don't move the needle a lot. Like, Hightower and Hooks basically have very little to do in this one. Hooks basically just repeats her character arc from the first film of being meek and having the commanding officer make fun of her until she kind of fights back literally at the end of the movie. Again, Hightower is in this, but he doesn't really do... Actually, he does one thing that's really funny. So what... I don't want to make it sound like there's no funny parts to this movie. I guess this is a good segue into what are the really good parts of this movie and what parts are funny. So there is a funny scene at our recurring joke, the Blue Oyster, when the gang of thugs are chasing after a shopkeeper. We're going to talk about him in a second. And he runs for shelter into the Blue Oyster, and the gang follows him in, and they get in a fight with the denizens of the Blue Oyster. And of course, it's a big old fight, and the only person who can straighten it out is Hightower. He goes in and basically beats up all the gang members and arrests them all, and becomes the hero of the patrons of the Blue Oyster. This is funny, and this kind of goes in the face of one of the things I was talking about in the last review. The idea of how offended should we be. I know that sounds really, whiny, but I talked a lot about the Blue Oyster and, how is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Is it just a thing and maybe we shouldn't analyze it too much? But here's one of the things that I liked about the way they worked with the Blue Oyster, in this one is that I liked that it was clear that the patrons of the Blue Oyster were not going to be pushed around by this gang. They were not going to just, fill the stereotypical Hollywood depictions of gay at the time. They fought back, and they were never persecuted by the police as being degenerates or anything like that. Nah, they were standing next to Hightower, and he was standing right in there with them, smiling and being like, yeah, all right, we did this, So I have to say, I really liked that part. That was a funny scene. Other funny scenes involve Feckler, where he and his new partner are eating donuts at a local cafe, and his partner, who's an older cop, is telling him, this neighborhood's actually not so bad. It's fine. People around here are generally nice, and you'll get to know them, and they're fun and wonderful people. And the whole time he's talking, you see in the background that members of the gang are pouring gasoline on a car outside, and they even come in and ask Feckler for a match, and he gives it to them, and they use that to light the car on fire. So it's a really well done scene in terms of the casual nature of the conversation that's going on while something goofy is going on in the background. So that scene is actually really funny. There's another really funny scene where our hapless merchant, and again, we're going to talk about him in just a second, is being robbed. And Mahoney and his new partner stumble across the robbery. And while trying to sneak in, the bad guys sneak out the back. Feckler sneaks in through the side. And a huge gunfight just breaks out between all the members of the police force, just firing randomly. And of course, Tackleberry and his new partner, who we will talk about in a moment, come in. And of course, you can imagine what happens when Tackleberry stumbles into this situation. So that moment and those reactions are all just really, really hysterical and very well done. I enjoyed them.
Gnarly.
Okay, so before we move on, we have to take our little side trip into how offended should I be? And yeah, it's still the 80s, folks. It's still the 80s, and the things that are in this film are not quite as shocking as the fact that they were still happening, some of them, in the 80s. It's so a lot of the more homophobic stuff is gone. We don't have any of the homophobic slurs. I mentioned the bit at the Blue Oyster. The worst they kind of do with them is after Hightower saves the day, like I say, they're all kind of crowded around him, smiling and, looking at him, and he's kind of looking, going, he's a little uncomfortable by it. But I don't think that's necessarily offensive, because let's be fair here. I don't care, man or woman. If Bubba Smith was there, I think everybody would be kind of like, hey, he was not a bad-looking gentleman. I have no shame in saying that. We're kind of okay there, but man, the racial stuff is off the hook in this one, particularly for Asian Americans. I will not kind of demonstrate what they do, but yeah, the accents, and you get to, I have a feeling like when Jones breaks out his martial arts for the first time, it's because two of the gang members are accosting a Chinese grocer, I believe. And I have a feeling the grocer's voice is dubbed in to make him sound more in keeping with the shtick about the dubbed Japanese martial arts movie that Michael Winslow is doing. And oh my god, it does not sound good. It does not sound good. They kind of have the chef at the Benihana acting in the same manner, so that's kind of like, ugh. But here's the one that really got me, and again, this is the thing that you're like, this is, when you're thinking about these issues, it's amazing to think just how long ago the 80s actually were, but at the same time, like, the 80s actually weren't that long ago, you know? And they have a blackface joke in this. A blackface joke. Oh my God. Like, and I thought about it, and there were a lot of blackface jokes back then. You found them on Designing Women and Golden Girls. But yeah, and you're just like, and again, they try to make it a little better since it's Mauser doing it, and just like with Copeland in the original, since he's the bad guy, you're supposed to not like him, and you're supposed to be like, oh, you know, boo, you know, but it doesn't change the fact it's in there. So I will say that I think this one, the offensive elements are a little bit more spread out, so you don't notice them as much. But the ones they have, holy shit. Like, damn.
Red.
Okay, so by now we've kind of explained why Police Academy 2 is not that great of a movie. It's a fairly weak sequel. You know, a lot of issues with it, so on and so on. So does that mean that it is completely irredeemable and there's nothing in there to recommend? No, not by a long shot. As a matter of fact, I think there are 4 things in this movie that make it important to the series and also elevates the film up on its own merit, and reasons why I would say, yeah, go check this one out, even though, you know, it's not that great. So let's talk about these 4 really, really good things that are done in this movie. So the first, I'm going to say this one first because I don't necessarily agree with it completely, but most critics at the time, and even now, agreed that this was not a particularly great film. But the thing that kind of put it over the top, and what made a lot of people remember it is the first film outing and the star turn for a young comedian at the time by the name of Bobcat Goldthwait, who you can tell this is his first movie because in the credits he's just listed as Bob Goldthwait. So for younger viewers, people who weren't around in the 80s, you may not get the impact of Bobcat Goldthwait and just how essentially 80s he really is. Like Gutenberg, he is a creation of the 80s and someone who found a lot of success for very, very odd reasons. So he is kind of that insane, harsh-voiced, kind of crazy character who plays Zed, the leader of the gang of miscreants in this film. Earlier I made the point that part of the issue with this film was the feeling that the actors were a little bit more restrained and didn't have as much freedom to improv and feel out their character and kind of fill it in with their own personal touches. I believe that is true for everyone except Bobcat, who you do feel, I think, because he was the fresh face and he was kind of the new discovery and people didn't quite know what to make of him yet, he was given, or at least it felt like he was given, a little bit more freedom to experiment and just find this insane character that would become his trademark, almost to his chagrin. He, like a lot of people, don't look back on the Police Academy movies that fondly. He feels like they typecast and everything, and I can understand that, and but I also have to raise the question, I don't know what parts he thought he lost out on because of his persona made famous by the Police Academy movies. I think they're the reason he has a career. And I like Bobcat Goldthwait. I think he's funny, and I love when his voice shows up. For younger viewers, if you don't quite know who this is, and this is even a fairly old comparison or example, but if you're familiar with Disney's Hercules, he was the voice of Pain in that one. So yeah, Pain. Yeah, he was the voice of Pain. So yeah, there you go. So you kind of picture that guy and the face that you picture when you think of that guy's voice. Yeah, that's pretty much him. So he does bring a lot of energy into the film that I feel was lost by its new structure. So when he's on screen, it still feels a little restrained, but there's definitely a little bit more wiggle room, and you definitely feel the atmosphere kind of lighten up, because you get the feeling he is just kind of winging it, whether he is or not. So the introduction of Bobcat Goldthwait as Zed is really, really important. Another character who is introduced, and I've mentioned him a couple of times already, we have the aforementioned merchant who was being terrorized by the gang throughout the film, whom we only refer to once by name as Sweet Check, who is played by Tim. I'm going to try my best not to mispronounce her name. Kazurinsky. So Sweet Check is this little nerdy, tiny little man. Was your typical 80s nerd, and just this poor, hapless guy who in every scene he's in is being terrorized, bullied, tossed around. I don't mean this in a bad way, but he is kind of the audience surrogate of just how rough this neighborhood has gotten, because every time he's on screen, something is happening to him. He is the Charlie Brown of this film. Just, why me? Why me all the time? But he does it with such, I don't know, there never seems to be any bitterness from him in his situation. Doesn't seem to be any anger. It's just his life, and he's just trying to live it. And he's incredibly adept at physical comedy. It's especially funny whenever he and Bubba Smith are sharing the screen, because he is so small and Bubba Smith was so big that, I don't know, it just makes a really great pairing. There's a great scene where they're running a street fair and Hightower is demonstrating, that whole hit the thing with the mallet and ring the bell test of strength, and he does it, and then he hands the mallet to Sweet Check, who of course has trouble lifting it, but he manages to ring the bell, and Hightower just gets this look on his face like, what? It's really well done. And so the introduction of Sweet Chick really helps bring, again, some of that freshness and some of that energy into the film. Both Zed and Sweet Check are going to be around for a couple of movies, so this is their introduction, and they were so well received, they're going to get larger parts. So on that, one of the other great things about this movie is its introduction of a police academy mainstay, and someone who is very synonymous with the series, even though he only joined it in this film. And that is the introduction of Lance Kinsey as Proctor. So Proctor is going to be our antagonist sidekick for the remainder of the series. He is Meltzer's kind of number one lackey, and then later he'll get traded to Harris, and he will kind of be their fall guy throughout the rest of the series. Much different than Copeland and Blanks in the first one, what makes Proctor work and work so well is that Lance Kinsey has this amazing ability of creating a character who, yes, is an antagonist and is, working against our heroes. And yet, there is something endearing and likable about him. Rebecca, my girlfriend, and I were talking about this not long ago. We were listening to another podcast. One of her true crime podcasters does a Golden Girls deep dive. And they were talking about an episode with Dorothy Zbornak's ex-husband Stan, as played by the late, great Herb Edelman. And it got me thinking of characters like that. Because it takes a very, very skilled actor to create a character like Stan Zbornak, who is, at their core, fairly deplorable, fairly helpless and amoral and self-centered, and yet to imbue them with enough innocence, likability, and charm that the audience, one, wants to see them back, and two, actually sympathizes with them to a certain extent. That is not easy to do, and it takes a rare combination of a really good actor and pretty good writing for that to come across. Like I said, Herb Edelman did it. I think Larry Linville did a really great job of it on MASH. I think to a certain extent, Jason Alexander on Seinfeld as George Costanza did it. And Lance Kinsey is a freaking master of it. Proctor is such a lovable little slime ball, because you get the impression watching him that Proctor is not a bad guy, that he's just kind of easily led and kind of parrots the attitude of the person who is kind of closest to him. He's the adult equivalent of the little kid who is so excited that the school bully has deemed them worthy of their quote-unquote friendship, that they're willing to kind of do anything to keep that friendship. But at their core, they're not inherently bad. A modern equivalent to this that I was thinking of would actually be Butters from South Park. A lot of times they team Butters and Eric Cartman up because Eric is completely amoral and Butters has a moral compass, but he has no self-confidence and is very easily dominated. And so he will often go along with Cartman's ideas just because Cartman's the loudest and seemingly the most authoritative in the room. But when left to his own devices, he's actually a pretty sweet kid. This was kind of the whole joke behind them creating Professor Chaos, is saying that it's the dark side of a kid who has no dark side. And that is Proctor. Proctor is that person with really no dark side and yet is trying to have one. With comedy, we already mentioned Harris and his ability to maintain things with dignity. The other side of comedy is that comedy comes from pain. And either pain that we want to see inflicted on someone because it's their comeuppance, or pain from someone we kind of feel sorry for what's happened to them. And that's Proctor. He is the other side of that coin. When bad things happen to him, you laugh, but you do feel a little bit sorry for him. And there's just that lovable energy. And man, does Lance Kinsey just do this so effortlessly. There's such a charm. I'm going to be interested to kind of keep an eye on this in future films, because I didn't really pick up on this when I was a kid. I think that they had an idea that they were trying to imply that Proctor was gay. When there's the riot at the Blue Oyster, Hooks is looking for the address, and Proctor just knows it off the top of his head. So I don't know if that was something that keeps up throughout the rest of the films. It's been so long, so it's something I'm going to keep an eye on as we go through. But it's kind of an interesting addition to his character if that subtext is actually there. So yeah, so the introduction of Proctor, who, again, is going to be one of the core members of the cast from here on out, is a really important one. But there's one thing about this movie that I think really does elevate it and saves it, in my opinion. There's a subplot in here that is so good and so charming that it makes the rest of the movie worth watching. So I mentioned, and I've gone into detail about how breaking away from kind of the established setup and flow of the original Police Academy movie is kind of working to this film's detriment. But there is one element that they kind of changed that I think works to its benefit. So in later films, we're going to see that part of the kind of Police Academy formula is there's always going to be some woman, kind of like the Kim Cattrall role in the original, that's going to be Mahoney's new love interest, the person that he woos with his creepy pickup lines and his weird brand of 80s chauvinistic, masculinity, which, apparently was supposed to be aspirational at the time, but just comes off as really sleazy now. And that's going to be a recurring element in the next several movies. However, in this one, they go against that grain and they don't introduce a love interest for Mahoney. They keep him focused on the main plot, which is a bit of character development for him, so I must give them credit. And instead, they give the love story to Tackleberry. So Tackleberry is teamed up with an experienced motorcycle cop named Kirkland, played by Colleen Camp, who, again, 80s filmgoers probably know best as Yvette from Clue. And it starts out, he's disappointed because Tackleberry is kind of this ball of adolescent angst and kind of a 13-year-old's idea of masculinity. But it turns out he and Kirkland have a lot in common. They are both very dedicated to their jobs. They're kind of gun nuts. Kirkland comes from a kind of extreme family. I'll talk about that in a second. And they build a romance, and his romance is kind of the centerpiece of this subplot, and it is amazing. It is so good. First of all, David Graff and Colleen Camp work so well together. They balance each other and just have such adorable chemistry. What I love is that both of these characters have this kind of macho exterior, but their interior, when that's all stripped away and they're in a situation that they're not comfortable with, like dating, they immediately revert to two little kids going out on their first date. And that charm and that innocence just permeates. And again, kind of like with Proctor, that charm and that innocence is not easy to manifest. That's not something you can just do. It takes talented actors with a really keen understanding of what they're doing to make this work. And it does. I love this. Every scene that Tackleberry and Kirkland have together is amazing. There's a wonderful scene after their first date where they're, getting physical, and they're undressing each other, but they're actually disarming each other. Tackleberry's got two shoulder holsters, ankle holsters. Kirkland's got a gun behind her back, on her ankle, between her cleavage, and they just keep dropping it's really well paced and really well done. I also like, and I'm going to talk about these characters more in the next review because they're going to have a more prominent role. I love that when Tackleberry goes to visit Kirkland's family, we see that, because the first thing you worry about when Tackleberry goes to meet the family is, oh God, how are they going to respond to this nut? But it turns out that her family is just as crazy as he is, just in different ways, even in ways that Tackleberry finds a little hard to process. Her dad and her brother kind of do that, you'll go fake fighting, but then they start really fighting and really punching each other, and they're laughing and beating the shit out of each other, and Kirkland's laughing, and Tackleberry's just sitting there like wide-eyed, like, what the fuck? But that whole sequence, that whole subplot is, I kind of like with Cadet Barbara the last time, I kind of wish more of the movie was dedicated to just that. I never wanted to leave that moment. And it's one of the real endearing things, and I think one of the moments, or one of the elements that made Tackleberry such a beloved part of this franchise, is just that innocence and that earnestness and that wholeheartedness that he exhibits. And I want to take a little bit, I'm not going to do like other podcasts do, which do really involve deep dives, but I do want to take a little bit and talk a little bit about David Graff as an actor, because he was, by all accounts, he was pretty amazing and a pretty good guy all around. First of all, he is probably one of the most prolific of the Police Academy cast. Probably next to George Gaines, he's got one of the larger IMDb profiles. This guy was literally in just about everything. If there was a television show in the 80s or 90s, odds are he was on it at some point. Like, he pops up everywhere, kind of the journeyman character actor that I think most people want to be. He was also, something I found out interesting, he was also a very skilled saxophone player. In the first film and in later films, they show Tackleberry playing a saxophone at the big party they're having after they sent Copeland and Blanks to the Blue Oyster. And I was just wondering, like, does he actually, and I checked it, yeah, he actually played the saxophone. So that was another aspect of just kind of letting the actors find the characters. What an interesting little character thing for Tackleberry, that on top of all of, being a gun nut and this manly man and all this, he took the time to learn the saxophone. That's pretty impressive.
Wicked.
David Graff studied theater at Orterburton College in Westerville. He attended graduate school at Ohio State University, but he dropped out in 1975 to pursue his acting career. Again, his acting career was very successful. While I don't think he ever attained mainstay power like he would with Tackleberry, the fact that he was working for as long as he was and had as many credits to his name as he did, that speaks to just how good he really was. He was also apparently one of the very respected representatives of the Screen Actors Guild. Then he served as a union rep. He was on their national board. He was part of several TV and theatrical steering committees, and he was part of the National Dependency Review Committee. So he really fought for fair treatment for his fellow actors and really worked towards the betterment in terms of working conditions for the acting community. So he was not only a really good actor, but he was a very dedicated person who sadly passed away in 2001 after, I believe it was a heart attack. So I feel like the acting world really lost something with his passing. And again, one of the great things about these films, and I think that's why Tackleberry is even more beloved now than maybe he even was then, is that there was a lot of heart to him, and I think we see that from David Graff. I think that's him coming through the character, and it's what makes Tackleberry so enjoyable, and it's what makes this love story in this film work so well, because you want Tackleberry to get the girl, and he does, and it's phenomenal. All right, it is time to wrap this one up. So the question we ask ourselves here at Totally Awesome, Bodacious, Radical, Gnarly 80s Reviews when we are finishing up is, does this film hold up? And I think, generally speaking, the answer to that has to be not really. It doesn't hold up necessarily as a film on its own. The comedy is not as strong. The funny moments, while there, are spread apart. And the stuff that does work doesn't really work unless you're familiar with what has come before. So I think in the short term, in the little picture, kind of as a self-contained film, no, it doesn't really hold up that well. As part of the larger whole, I think it's a worthy entry. And I think that's something you have to kind of think about when you think about some of these series, is that at a certain point, you have to kind of look at them as kind of like the Marvel Cinematic Universes. How are they as an individual film, but how are they as part of the bigger picture? I think as part of the bigger picture, it's a not quite remarkable entry into the series, but the stuff that works and the stuff that's introduced that does go well goes so well that it makes it important to the rest of its own franchise. So little picture, no, it doesn't really hold up. Bigger picture, yeah, it's worth the time. So kind of a 6 of one, half dozen of the other thing. But on the whole, there's still enough enjoyable in here to get a laugh. Characters that you like get to expand, and it sets the stage for future films, which I think are going to get the formula back on track and start looking a little bit more like the Police Academy films we remember. So that's my opinion of Police Academy 2, their first assignment. Take it or leave it. All right, so thank you very much for coming along. Thanks for listening. And when we return, we will head back to the Academy as we go back to training. So until next time, drive safe, and I will see you at the movies.